Good morning. Good morning. How are you guys doing this morning? I'm hoping that I can give you a pretty good amount of information that you can take back with you and implement the cybersecurity maturity model certification activities that will take you to the next level in delivering products and services to the federal contracting community. And so I'm going to go ahead and get started. I'm going to tell you a little bit about our company. This is, as Jasmine said, Capstone Management Consulting. We kind of focus on the 5 Ps of business growth when it comes to prospects, pursuits, proposals, processes, and performance. And so today we're going to kind of focus on that processes aspect where we talk about how CMMC can actually help you and also help you in terms of growing your business with the federal contracting community. And so today we'll talk about what is CMMC. So I'll give you a backdrop to that and explain what it means for you and how it came about. And then we'll talk about what exactly are we protecting. And then we'll go ahead and talk about changes from CMMC 1.0 to 2.0. And then we'll talk about a timeline, how long do you have to get started with this and to get it completed? And then we'll go into a deep dive about CMMC and learn how it affects you and how can you comply with the requirements of this new federal regulation. And we'll talk about the next steps. And then we have an E3 approach that'll help kind of navigate you through this process. And then I'll give you some key takeaways. And again, if you have questions as we're going along, please type them in the chat. I have with us today Craig Williams. He's a CMMC assessor. He was actually one of the first people to go through that first cohort of 72 participants. And so we have him here. So if your questions are a little bit more technical, he's a CISP, CCNA. He's done all types of wonderful things for the intelligence community. And so he's with us today as well. So we'll go ahead and get started. So what is CMMC? So it's the Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification, and it was created to kind of address the needs that DoD had to ensure protection of their unclassified information as they awarded contracts to the defense industrial base. And you'll see that term DIB everywhere. It's just the community of companies that are supporting DoD and helping DoD meet its mission, Department of Defense. And so the result CMC came about, it was with DoD working with industry to develop a model that will provide a way to measure cybersecurity maturity of the DIB. And so it consists of the security requirements from the NIST Special Publication 800-171, and there's a subset of requirements from the NIST Special Publication 800-172. And CMC is basically a unified cybersecurity standard for future DoD acquisitions. And so if you want to do work with the Department of Defense, you have to ensure that your systems and your information is secure so that you're not used to, I guess, accommodate a breach for government information. And so some of the key sources in the development of CMMC, again, were the two NIST special publications, the 800-171 and 172. And then you have to know a little bit about that cybersecurity framework, and that's that NIST framework for improving critical information infrastructure security, which is the cybersecurity framework. And then you have some federal acquisition regulation clauses and defense federal acquisition regulation clauses as well that was considered. And so CMC is an all-encompassing model to assess the maturity of your information systems and how you protect data, not only with your company, but it also, the primary goal was to protect the information of the government, but as a result, your company also gets protected by implementing the various controls in the special publication 800-171 and 172. And so what are the changes from CMMC 1.0 to 2.0? And so I've pulled a chart from the CMMC AB website. And as you can see, 1.0 and 2.0 are drastically different. So 2.0 has 3 levels, whereas 1.0 had 5. And so they went back, they heard from industry, and the officials at CMMC, the AB accreditation board, went back and they said, how can we make this more workable for the DIB? And so what they did, they simplified and reorganized the levels. They ensured that controls at each level were aligned with the NIST publications that we just spoke of, the NIST special publication 800, 171, and 172. And then they removed process maturity requirements, which consisted of performed, documented, managed, reviewed, and optimizing. So what that was initially intended was to say, are your processes performed? And that was given a specific level, level 1. Are your processes documented? Are they managed? Are they reviewed? And how are you optimizing your processes to further secure information and assets that are prone to be kind of attacked? So self-assessments return, and what that means is that now the DIB is able to self-assess their cybersecurity maturity level, where they are on that spectrum of level 1 to level 3. The plan of actions and milestones also returned, and I believe you have 180 days now to respond. Now, the caveat to that is that you can't put all of the controls in a POAM. There are some that you're not going to be able to do that. You're going to have achievement of those specific practices before you can even consider that specific level that you're pursuing. And so not all practices are able to be placed in a POAM, and we'll talk more about that. And then they have introduced government-led assessments at level 3. They also introduced limited waivers. And what that means is if they have a procurement that they have to get out, they will allow the contracting officer to do a limited waiver. So say, for instance, if they wanted to get to a company that had a specialized type of product that they needed, they would do a limited waiver if that company is not at a level 2 or level 3 or whatever level is specified in the acquisition, which will give that company time to bring their systems and data, that protection level, up to the appropriate level. And we'll talk more about that as well. And then the movement from CMMC model 1.1 to 2.0 is much easier to understand, and it's much more feasible for the DIB sector to adopt. And then back in 1.0, you had 17 domains because they added 3 additional domains, but now they've shifted back to the 14 domains that are in the NIST SP 171, 800, 171, and you'll hear me say that a lot. So, and the domains that they removed were the asset management, the recovery, and then the situational awareness. Those were the ones that they removed. And of course, a lot of the practices in those were already absorbed into the 800, 171 anyway. And so what's the timeline for CMMC 2.0 to become official? Well, it's currently in the rulemaking phase. On November 17th, they published the advance notice of proposed rulemaking, basically letting industry know that we're going to be moving to CMMC 2.0, and it's going to take 9 to 24 months for this to be approved. So if you're looking at that time frame, so anywhere between August 2022 of this year to November of 2023, this can become final, which means that you would have to comply with the requirements of CMMC 2.0 if you are pursuing government contracts, not only DoD, but now Fed civilian agencies can put clauses into the acquisitions, the RFPs, the RFQs that you see coming out, requiring you to be at a specific level just to submit a bid for that opportunity. So that's something that you have to consider. And then all of those changes, again, that's reflected in that 2.0 framework that we just talked about. Those will be implemented in the rulemaking process. And again, adherence is going to be required. So let's deep dive into CMMC. So again, as you can see on the right in the diagram, there are 3 levels. Level 1 is the foundational level. There you have 17 basic cyber hygiene practices pulled from the NIST 800-171. And so you have to kind of assess your cybersecurity environment and submit scores to say, yes, I meet this requirement. No, I don't have this. We'll have to put it in a POAM. And then it generates a score, and that score has to be placed in the supplier performance risk system. Now you hear some people call it SIPRs, you'll hear some people call it SPRs, but that's the system, the supplier performance risk system. And you have to do that on a yearly basis. And so you don't have to seek a third party, such as a CMMC assessor or a government-led assessment at this level. So it's basically you looking at your cybersecurity environment, developing a score, and then shoring up any areas that you are kind of weak in or there are any deficiencies. And then from level 1, you move to level 2. And as you can see there are 110 practices, all aligned with the NIST SP 800-171. There it is again. Annual assessments at this level will be required, but you also have to be certified by a CMMC third-party assessment organization. So a CMMC assessor has to come in every 3 years for certain acquisitions. And of course, this will be explained in the procurement that you're pursuing, the requirements. You still would have to update your scores in SIPRs on a yearly basis. So you have to do that as well. And so at that level, you are actually handling controlled, unclassified information. And so you want to be sure that you are able to address the requirements that would deem your organization, let's say, worthy of handling this type of information. And so here you're going to address the 17 practices from level 1 plus the additional 93 practices for level 2. And that's how they come up with the 110 number. And then if you're moving to level 3, that can be an aspiration because as of right now, they have not defined the requirements for this level. So right now, you just have the option of doing level 1 and level 2. Level 3 will be coming along fairly soon, from what we've been told, and it'll consist of course, all of the practices from level 1, all of the practices from level 2, and then additional practices from the NIST SP 800-172. So in essence, you can have, that you're going to have at least 110 practices, but then you're going to have additional practices that you have to address at level 3. And so that's how the model works. So based on your handling of information, so if you're handling federal contract information, then you can come in at level 1. That level may be sufficient for your organization. But of course, the caveat is, how is it defined in the procurement opportunity? Does the RFP say you can be level 1, or does it say you need to be level 2? That's going to be the consideration. And so that's in essence how the levels work, the activities required in terms of assessments, and then the practices that you have to meet for that particular, for the particular level. And so let's delve down deeper into these domains and practices. Again, we said that we had 14 domains and they're all listed here. And at level 1, as you can see from the table here, you have 6 domains that you would have to address for a total of 17 practices. Then once you move to level 2, you have to address all of the domains for an additional 93 practices, as we previously discussed, for a total of 110 practices. And so I want you to keep in mind that a specific practice can have multiple requirements or assessment objectives. And so you see here for access control, there's 4. You may get one practice that has multiple requirements. And so the 17, that number is just based on the main practice. Any sub practices that fall under that are not included in that number. So keep that in mind. So I don't want you to think, oh, 17, okay, I can do that. But, give yourself some time to read through the practices and see what the sub practices are, because there could be multiple sub practices tied to a specific practice. And as you see in level 2, across the board, you're shoring up your cybersecurity environment pretty well here, because you're touching aspects from each of the domains. And then I'm sure level 3 will be the same, where you're touching each of the domains, and there'll be an increased number of specific practices at level 3. So in a nutshell, this is how you can begin the process of determining, do I want to go to level 1? Do I want to go to level 2? What's my scope? What type of information am I touching? Am I touching FCI, federal contract information, or am I touching CUI, controlled unclassified information? You'll hear it mentioned as CUI as well, and that's the CUI. And so a lot of that comes into play and determines the level of practices that you'll have to address. And so how does this affect me? So organizations within the defense industrial base, the DIB, that are supporting, if you're supporting DoD or a higher education research institution, it affects you. So if you're handling federal contract information, FCI, or controlled unclassified information, CUI, it affects you. And so once it affects you, the next thing you need to do is determine the scope. Okay, what assets do I have in my environment that is considered FCI or CUI? And then once you figure that out, then you kind of want to build a force field around that information to ensure that it's not breached. And so you can achieve a specific level for this when you're considering, do I need to do the entire enterprise network, because the entire enterprise, that network is touching FCI or CUI, or do I need to do a segment or an enclave, depending on, where that information is and how you can protect it and ensure that it's stored properly, it's transmitted properly, and the proper people have access to that information. And so at level 1, again, you're doing a self-assessment scope. You're looking at all of the domains and trying to figure out, okay, where does this FCI come in? Where do I process it? Where do I store it? Where do I transmit it? If you have a PMO where your projects are uploading, let's say, monthly reports, and those reports may contain sensitive information relevant to that particular contract, you want to have that portal shored up and making sure that the proper people are accessing it, they're able to transmit properly, the data is stored properly, and that it's processed appropriately. And the same with level 2, you're protecting a higher level, you're protecting controlled unclassified information. And so you want to look at that and determine, what's my scope? Where does this type of information reside in my cybersecurity or my information system environment? And then categorize that. Are they CUI assets? Are they security protection assets? Are they contract of risk management assets? specialized assets, or out of scope. And so each of these categories has specific requirements and CMMC assessment requirements. And when you're assessing yourself, it's not pass or fail. It's either you've met, or the practice is not met, or it's not applicable. And so let's talk about compliance. How do I comply? The rulemaking that we just talked about, all the contractors and subcontractors in the DIB are going to be required to comply. And so you can start seeing some of this language in procurements as early as August of this year and as late as November of next year. So for now, in terms of compliance, conduct a level 1 assessment to see where you are and make sure you're submitting that score in a CIPRS. And then contracting officers can then validate your score in that system prior to awarding contracts, because that's going to happen similar to when there's a woman-owned small business opportunity released. The SBA does go in and make sure that you have that woman-owned small business certification. They'll go into their system to validate that. Same thing if you're considered an 8A company. The SBA is going to go in and they're going to validate that for the government agency, or the government agency themselves will do that. And this is what's going to happen with CMMC. Before they award you a contract, they're going to go into the system, into CIPRS, to see what's your score when it comes to cybersecurity. And that has actually started November. So you want to make sure, November 30th of 2020. So you want to make sure that you have that score in the system, because it can hinder you from receiving contract award. And so again, like I said, this is going to be a requirement for DoD contracts, and it specifically says DoD, but it's actually spilling over into some of the civilian contracts. For instance, in the federal contracting community right now, all the talk is about an opportunity called Polaris. And Polaris is a GWAC that's it's a government-wide acquisition contracting vehicle where all government agencies can procure IT products and services. And it specifically says in this procurement that they understand that CMMC is currently a DoD requirement, but they're going to use it as a baseline for civilian acquisitions. And so you're going to have to, for this opportunity, you're going to have to write up, how do I plan to meet the CMMC requirements that are coming up that all companies doing business with DoD have to meet? And this is appearing again in a federal civilian contract. So this, it says here, CMMC will soon be a requirement for the award of DoD contracts. But I want you to be aware it's not only DoD, Fed Civ, civilian agencies such as the Department of Transportation, Department of Labor, Department of Interior, the Environmental Protection Agencies, they all can put this requirement in their procurements that you have a specific level on the CMMC model. So what do? Get moving. Start this process as soon as possible, because if you know that it can happen August, as early as this August, then you want to kind of get moving. Get assessed, find out where you are, get a program in place and start working on addressing any deficiencies or weaknesses. Get compliant. And this is where you have someone come in, look at what you've done and kind of sign off on it and say, you're ready. When the assessment, when it's time comes for you to be assessed, you're ready. And so keep in mind, as we talked before, at level 2, you have 110 controls. Those 110 controls easily morphs into 300 when you consider the multiple assessment objectives with each practice. And so you want to get started sooner, because the implementation of this will probably take longer than what you're estimating. Because, you know, when you hear 2023, it's like, oh, that's so far away. But what if it happens in August of 2022? Are you ready? Are you compliant? Will this stop you from being able to compete on contracts? And we don't want that to happen. So the key is to get moving, get assessed, and get compliant. And so next steps, we have this E3 approach that has helped several of our clients, kind of get prepared for this. And so the first thing again is an evaluation. Find out where you are, what's your as is state. Conduct a gap analysis and get some, prep evaluations done so that you know where you are. You can build a plan of actions and milestones, a POAM, to kind of tell you these are the things that we need to address now so that we're ready when this becomes final. And then this is where execution is where you are actually doing the assessment. You have the assessor come in. There's the planning and preparation stage. The assessment is actually conducted. The report results are presented to your management teams. And then you have remediation and adjudication. And this is where you are addressing any weaknesses or deficiencies that have been placed in your POAM, plan of actions and milestones. And then once you do that, you're constantly evolving your cybersecurity environment. You're continuously monitoring. You're looking at access control. You're looking at audit and accountability. You're looking at risk and configuration management and saying to yourself, can I shore this up even more to prevent breaches? Because as you can see in the news, there's a data breach going on all the time. And so we want to make sure that if you are a trusted federal contractor, you don't want to be the one that's having the finger pointed to say that, our enemies got that information because they breached their network. So having CMMC and adopting the practices with it will definitely help with that. And again, as I said, with the CMMC model, you're going to have to get reevaluated every 3 years. So it's not a one and done. You want to, again, continuously be improving your cybersecurity posture. So determine your baseline state. That's where you are, your as is. Determine your scope. Do I have to do my entire network, or do I just need to do a particular segment of my network? And then decide which, maturity level works for you. Can I just start at level 1 and work with that and then eventually move to level 2? Or do I want to go to level 2 right now and find out what I need to do to put the specific practices in place to make sure that I'm meeting all of the requirements outlined at level 2? And again, there's your POAM, because not everybody's going to be perfect. So you're going to have some deficiencies that you need to address. And so that POAM gives you a roadmap of things that you need to implement based on the recommendations of the gap analysis. And then internally, make sure you're conducting internal readiness reviews. Don't wait until that year. You may want to do it quarterly. Let's look at our cybersecurity posture on a quarterly basis. And then out of the 14 domains, pick a couple of domains that you'll focus on in conducting that internal readiness review, just to make sure that you are actually continuously implementing the requirements of the practice. And if you happen to fall in some places, it doesn't become a huge problem because you're monitoring it on a, let's say, quarterly basis or a semi-annual basis, whatever works for your organization. And then engage with the CMMC assessor, because they know the model, they know what's going to be required to get you to achieve that level 2 or level 1 certification. And then be prepared to conduct those annual reviews that you have to conduct and upload your score into CIPRS. So be prepared to do that. And of course, be proactive in having internal readiness reviews and internal audits so that you don't have any surprises when you're conducting that annual review, because you don't want to conduct that annual review and then you have a negative score in zippers. And so again, how that works, you have a score of 110, and for each practice that you don't meet, you subtract from that 110. And so you want to make sure your score is as close to 110 as possible, legitimately. So these are the things that you want to consider when you are saying to yourself, how can I comply? What do I need to do next? And so consider this E3 approach where you're evaluating, then you're doing the execution, actually getting the assessment, and then evolution where you're constantly evolving your cybersecurity environment. And so key takeaways. So here, definitely, as I said before, CMMC 2.0 is going to happen. So how will you prepare? How are you going to get ready to meet the requirements in this current regulation? Don't underestimate implementation. Again, at level 2, you have 110 controls, but they can easily morph into over 300 when you consider those multiple assessment objectives within each practice or sub-practice. And then POAMs. These are allowable, but you still have to meet a baseline number of requirements prior to contract award. And so again, not all requirements are going to be allowable on a POAM. So take, for instance, if you have the access domain and you have to show how you ensure that you limit information, in terms of system access to authorized users, processes acting on behalf of authorized users or devices. So how do you limit access, making sure that the right person has the right access to the right system or device? So you'll have to answer that question. There may be one that you cannot waive. So you have to be able to, make sure that you're conducting these gap analysis and know what's considered POAMable and what's not considered POAMable. So again, some requirements, you cannot include them on a POAM. So don't depend on a POAM to get you through. Then you have the waivers. A lot of times the waivers are going to be restricted to use by the contracting officer. And so what they're going to do is they're going to say, again, as we talked about before, we need this specialized software application. This particular app does all this special stuff for us. There's nothing out in the market that's like it. So we have to get it from this vendor. And so there's a limited waiver process that will allow the government from putting CMMC requirements in that particular acquisition. And again, it's for select mission critical requirements. And when this waiver is actually deemed necessary, they have to go through senior DoD leadership to get approval. And the waiver will have limited duration. So the takeaway from this is don't depend on waivers because it has to be an extenuating circumstance before waiver will be granted. And if you get a waiver, you're still going to have a plan in place to attain a specific level. So if it's level 2, they may say you have to get level 2 assessed, get that certification within 90 days. And so you're going to have to work very aggressively to meet that, or you are, at risk of losing that opportunity. So don't let that happen. Again, get moving, get assessed, and get compliant. And so get that baseline assessment done now so that you know where you are and that you're working towards a specific level. So if you're working towards level 1, get a baseline assessment, find out where you are now, and then begin working towards getting level 1. And then you can put a plan into getting level 2, because as I foresee it, level 2 is going to probably be the main level that the agencies are going to put in the procurements for more complex operations, things where the scope of work is a little bit more complex than, let's say, providing an admin assistant. So you want to make sure that you know where you stand now so that you can get yourself to the next level. And so you can do that by partnering with us. And I hope that I've answered a lot of the questions that you may have had about CMMC. I hope that I've taken out some of the complexity of the model. And again, I'd like to thank the Maryland PTAC for having me come and speak on this wonderful topic. It's not a bad thing, it's a good thing. Both the company and the government will definitely benefit from implementation of this model. And then I also like to thank my colleague, Craig Williams, for attending. Again, he's a CMMC provisional assessor, and he's with us just in case you have any technical questions. And back to you, Yasmin.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you for demystifying it for us, because I know that people see the acronym CMMC and then their eyes kind of glaze over trying to figure out what on earth does that mean and what do I have to do to comply. So I do appreciate that. Okay, so we do have a couple of questions. One is, I have a very small business. Is there a free practice self-assessment tool I can use? And a follow-on question from that is it mandatory to use a C3 PAO?
Okay, there are assessment tools online. You can check the NIST website and you can check the CMMC-AB website. That's for level 1. So you can definitely do that. And then what was the second part of the question about the C3 PAOs? The question was, is it required that they go through that?
Yes, is it required? I'm sorry, I forgot to unmute myself.
Oh, okay.
Is it required to use a third party?
Yes. At level 2, yes. You have to have a third party assessment. Now, for some procurements, the government can put in the, let's say, section H, where you talk about clauses and requirements there. They can put a clause in there that says you have to be CMMC level 2 with an assessment from C3 PAO. So you have to make sure that you're reading. So the answer to that question is yes. If you have to get an assessment, it has to be with a certified CMMC assessor. If you're doing self-assessments at level 1, it is not required.
Okay, thank you. All right, we have another question. Can you discuss, a lot of acronyms here, MSGCC versus MSGCC high for level 2 and 3? And should we work to be compliant with 1.0 or 2.0?
Okay, the first part of the question, if Craig is on, if you can unmute Craig Williams, Yasmin, that would be great. The second part of your question is 1.0 is going away. We would have to adhere to the requirements in CMMC 2.0. So let's see,
Craig is unmuted. Go ahead.
I can handle the first part. So since the change to 2.0, Microsoft has not come out with guidance on whether GCC or GCC high is going to conform to level 2 or 3. They anticipate that GCC high is going to cover level 3, just as it was going to cover level 3 before, but it hasn't come out with an official determination yet.
Okay, thank you for that.
And for the people that are not aware, so GCC high, so you have Office 365, which is their cloud version of email and the Office suite. GCC high is the FCI/CUI platform that covers that.
Thank you, Craig, for that explanation. Hopefully that helps to the person who asked. And this is a question that we get regularly. If I'm only a subcontractor on a DoD contract, does my organization still need to be CMMC certified?
If your organization has a flow down provision in your subcontracting agreement where you're touching FCI or CUI, yes. So say, for instance, if you are supporting Booz Allen and Hamilton, just to throw out a name, if you're supporting them on a DoD project and you are accessing systems as a subcontractor, yes, because there are flow down provisions that Booz Allen will be subject to, and they have to flow that down to all of their subcontractors. So yes.
Okay, wonderful. It looks like that's all the questions we have. And so if anybody wants to follow up with you, Joe, what's the best way for them to contact you?
You can contact me via email, as you see there, info@capstonemc-llc.com. You can contact me at jdeans at the same email, and then you can go visit my website as well, capstonemc-llc.com.
All right, that's wonderful. Thank you so much. And thank you to everybody for participating today. And thanks, Craig, for joining in. That was really helpful. And like I said, this has been recorded, so it will be available shortly on our YouTube channel. So you can review it again if you wish to, or share it with your team members. Thank you, Joe. Thanks, everybody. And we'll see you soon. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.